to be here with you on this wintry night with what I think is going to be a warm conversation for you all out there who are following us on YouTube and Facebook. And as you know, as my custom, I love to start every interview or every show with a quote from a famous African. And today I've selected Wangari Maathai, and you know that's just one of my favorites. And the quote is, "When you know who you are free." And I feel like this quote is very, very encompassing and very, very reflective of the author we have in studio today. I'd like to welcome Shanice Ndlovu, the author of The Pride of Noonlay and Other Stories, to the Tando Channel Book Club. How are you, Shanice?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Selena. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. You just look lovely. And I love the way that you picked on the colors of the book club, and you just look like a beautiful flower, really.
Oh,
On the
I blend right in. I blend right in.
Mhm. No, you don't blend right in, you offset our wonderful
uh,
online studio. So thank you very, very much for that. Um,
no.
so for those of you who are watching and you are curious to know what Shanice has blessed us with in the literary libraries of African female authors, let me tell you a little bit about her book. The stories in The Pride of Noonlay are crackling, lyrical and controlled, and the words Ndlovu conjures are fascinating and vivid. This collection is a fresh contribution to African fantasy. Take a deep dive into stories of love, sacrifice, and loss. With this collection, you won't want to come up for air. Ndlovu's voice is original, confident, and lyrically beautiful, weaving tales of humanity even in the strangest of circumstances. Shanice Ndlovu is a Zimbabwean born writer. Her work mainly consists of short stories in the genre of epic fantasy. A few of these stories can be found in her first collection, The Pride of Noonlay, published by Majaji Books in 2020. She was also crowned Africa's Ultimate Storyteller by Hadithia Africa for the same year. Ndlovu started and runs a poetry podcast called The Poetcast, and one of her short stories titled Waterheart, was recently nominated for the Normal Speculative Fiction Award. So congratulations for all of those wonderful accolades at your very, very I want to say tender age, but I feel like that will be so condescending. But I just find it amazing that when you published the book in 2020, you were like in your mid 20s. And so I think that that's really, really something that's quite noteworthy in a very, very good way, in a very impressive and respectful way. So tell us, Shanice, why did you write The Pride of Noonlay and Other Stories?
Um, I mean, to respond to a question like that with an acceptable response would be to assume that it's something that I had experienced. But the writing has always been something that I knew that I would do, that I had to do. You know, yeah, our people believe that we are born with certain things, touching certain things in our hands, and once you have those things, you have a responsibility. And for me, those well, one of those things is the telling of stories. And in this case, yeah, stories, they came and they needed to be told, and they came about in the form of the Pride of Noonlay.
Okay, so I'm gonna come back to that, but now that The Pride of Noonlay is out and you've got this collection out, your debut book, how do you feel about the end product? How do you feel about this point of the journey where you've closed this loop and you said, okay, this is what it is, and it's out there, and it's having its life and its experience with readers and publishers and reviewers and all kinds of audiences. What do you, when you look at that book, how do you feel about the outcome?
I mean, of course, it's an achievement, and you learn quite earlier on to celebrate each and every one of them because there won't be very many. But I am quite proud. And the book that I ended up with is very different from the book that I submitted. I'm sure Colleen, the lady that runs Mujaji Books, she can attest to that. But it was a lot of work getting it to the final product, to an actual book. And a lot of that was Noreen Dorman, the lady that helped me edit it. And I'm quite proud with the way we ended up, just in terms of entangling the stories and the way that I thought we were heading initially and the way we ended up. All of it was a lot of work, but it was worthwhile. So if I won't be proud of anything else, I will be proud of the work that we put in, all of us, including Magadi, as well as the editor.
That's awesome. That's really, really awesome. And, it sounds like the book that you ended up with, you feel is worthy and deserving of the efforts that you put into the book. And so I think that that's amazing and that's incredible. We all want to do work that we are proud of, and we all want to do work where we can take a look and say, yes, the blood, sweat, tears were definitely worth it for this thing, even if it isn't what I imagined it would be. So now to go back to the very first question, why did you write Pride of Noonlay? I think I want to follow that up with how did you write Pride of Noonlay? Because, first of all, we've got this genre, fantasy, okay, connected to epic fantasy, African fantasy, and you come up with this collection of stories, and they're all written from kind of like the same fantasy universe, but different stories. How did that come about?
So the idea initially, when I started writing River of Monty, which is the first character that I ever wrote in this world, was to write a fully fledged novel, like fleshed out. But then I realized that I didn't know enough of this world to write a novel, and it would have been arrogant, to say the least, for me to assume that I was in any position to tell a full story of it. So the idea was to write a short story in each continent of this world, not for the purpose of publishing, but for the purpose of me understanding it. But at the end of the day, there ended up being so many stories, something ought to have been done with them. And that's how we came about with this collection and this compiling them, the stories that made more sense together, compiling them and putting them together and submitting them. And obviously, Mutafi eventually publishing them. But the world was there. It was just a question of approach. Like, how would I bring about, how would I introduce it? That's why I like to say, usually when I speak about the Pride of Noonlay, that this is a window, right, into this world. And everything else that is to come is a door, perhaps, and then the world itself entirely eventually when we finally get to that. But this is it's a window, it's a glimpse.
Well, I mean, it's a technicolored stained glass window that you've given us in this short story collection. So there are some people who love the book who've reviewed it, and some of their stories that stood out for them were not worst of it. Loved this piece, she says. This one was dark and funny, but also quite sad. Story about incest and twins being haunted by their shadows, wanting to rip their hearts out. A mother who chose to punish her kids by putting a curse on them because the love they had for each other was unacceptable. So when I read this review and I read what the story is about from this review, I'm like, how on earth can this be about another world or another universe? These are such human themes. These are so common. They're so universal. But I have to say, from the story that I read, which was Walking Fish, I was like, the way that you write, very lyrical. I agree with everybody. There's definitely a very melancholic mood to the writing. And I think that has its place in giving us the feel and letting some of the impact of some of the things that you write about, because definitely in Walking Fish, the statement around loneliness is huge in that story. But what possessed you to want to make a story out of incest, a curse, and then set that in another world, in another universe with its own rules, but still some of the very common universal themes, prejudices, challenges that we face in the real world, in real life.
Right. I very much love the fact that you used the word possess, because Joanna Harris said writing is a possession of thoughts that's not altogether benign. And it tends to feel that way sometimes, like you're not entirely in control of whatever it is that is being produced. with not the worst of it, when you were reading that review to me, I actually haven't read that one because I do make it a point to avoid those. But it made it clear to me that what I am responsible for as a writer is the thing that I write and not the way that it is interpreted, right? Because the person that wrote the review says the mother sends the curse because of this love that she deems to be abhorrent, right? But that is not the case. She sends the curse because they leave her alone. And but obviously we view each and every story through the lens of who we are and through our own experiences, which is amazing and it's great, despite what the author meant for it to be. I love that about storytelling, that all of it will be determined by who we are. In terms of what possessed me to write that story, Stephen King, one of the people that I look up in terms of the writing, he wrote an amazing book called On Writing. And in that book, he says that the only duty that you have as a writer is to tell the truth, right? And this is something that I feel like was innate in me, something that I knew even before I read that. It's something else to hear his voice out. So these are things that happen around us all the time, whether or not we acknowledge them. And once I start painting those in pink and making them nice and pretty and sugaring them just so they're easier to swallow down, I am being dishonest. I am abandoning my one duty as a writer. So even when the truth is ugly, even when the truth is unacceptable, I have an honor. I have a duty to tell it the way that I see it. So this was just my attempt at a version of truth.
Your attempt at a version of truth. Very, very interesting statement there. Another review, which is for the title story of the collection, says this. The Pride of Noonlay, super emotional piece about love and sacrifice, about letting go and going for what you love. It is about choice between love and duty. At first, I thought it was a queer read, but it wasn't, and that's cool. I guess the word pride got me excited a bit.
Right.
So,
right.
The Pride of Noonlay. Can you tell us in your words what that short story is about in particular and why you chose that as the title story for the collection?
Right. Another thing that Stephen King says in that book is that he has a lot of writer friends, right? And when they all gather together for whatever, for drinks or whatever, none of them ask each other like where the stories come from because they all know they don't know. But it's just a question of how it comes about. The Pride of Noonlay actually came about from a song, which is an old folk song, Irish folk song, basically, where there's this woman is deemed to be a whore, but some people believe her to be possessed. So I guess it was a question, and this is just the way it came about, not where the story is from. It was a question of who loves this woman and what will they do for her. And the Pride of Noonlay was born that way. And it's also every single story, every single origin story, even here on earth with all our religions. We have, we have gods and we have evil and we have good and we have Jesus and we have the devil and we have demons and we have angels, right? In our pursuit of divinity, which is a very, very much a human factor, we will, I don't want to say conjure those things, but we will create them just to make things easier for ourselves. And this world did need its own version of divinity. It's just one because there are many, but this is a combination of those things, where the story came from and an attempt of grasping a version of divinity for this world.
Very, very interesting.
This is where we get, this is the story where we get introduced to at least a glimpse into the different gods that exist here and the tools that they sort of put together, Sarat, grasp rays of the sun to manufacture these things that will fight evil, angels. So it's the things that we will tell ourselves in order to live in this world, in order to live with ourselves, basically. Yeah.
It's very interesting that you say it like that, because when you encounter some of these divine ideas and some of the other stories in the book. There's clear goals, even for those divine beings, and those things are being worked out in the background or driving some of the atmosphere around things like decline, which I think that we
Right.
can access when we think about national decline or periods of golden ages in history, because the stories are written in different periods of time within your world. So, I mean, it's quite interesting
Yeah.
how you use a lot of those to give us a glimpse of, a different time and kind of like the sense of decline, glory, golden age. But I must say, for me, not having read the entire collection, the excerpts I did read, there is a very strong melancholic feel. And I want to ask you about that. And I mentioned this to you just before we started the interview. Like, why so dark,
Right.
Shanice? Why so dark?
It's my nature. That is literally a direct quote from Calypso in this. I don't know. It's Pirates of the Caribbean when she leaves and this man follows her and says, she said, "You were in love with me. Why did you leave?" And she says, "It's my nature." There's just certain aspects of yourself that you cannot stop, right? People ask me all the time, like, how much of what you write, how much of this is who you are, right? It's not intentional. I don't sit there and say, oh, this is me, I'm writing myself in. But because I am writing it, my nature is going to bleed into the story. Happy people write songs, sad people write poems, and a lot of this is poetry. Um, it's, it's my nature. There's a lot of truth in melancholy, more truth than if there ever was in anything that claims to be happy. We don't have to hide anything. We try in as much as we can to tell the truth as we
Hmm. Very, very interesting. I mean, I do agree with that. I think that there is a lot more of life that is truthfully melancholic. It's not always a happy Saturday morning. To kind of parlay into something Matthew McConaughey once said. I think life is really more in the drama genre, of things, and therefore more interesting and richer, as you say. But when you talk about dark being your nature or melancholy being your nature, I just cannot buy that. Not only are you so brightly, presented before us,
we
but
learn to pretend. We it's an art to pretend.
yeah, your nature is far from melancholic at all. So I think that's very, very interesting. And perhaps, like you did say, it's maybe also part of the function and form of poetry, as it captures and retells and represents some of the themes around life and existence, which can be, I think, especially in the era we are living in now, quite melancholic, if you consider some of the things that we've been through in our time of
um,
history in the last couple of years.
yeah, but
So,
I
mhm.
meant it more. Oh, sorry,
No, go
sorry to
ahead.
cut you, but I meant it more in the sense of natural proclivities, not in the sense of the world having any interference. There's that thing that everyone constantly says about how everyone is born with two wolves, the white wolf and the dark wolf, and the wolf that grows bigger is the wolf that you feed. But what they always
Mm,
fail to mention is the fact that these wolves, when you're born with them, they're not equal in everyone. It's just a natural instinct. Some people are just born with more of the light than they are of the dark. None is greater. It's just a question of nature. Mm.
hmm. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. I look forward to your personal essay exploring that, because I think that yeah, there's quite a
Oh
deep
God.
theory there. So so we've just gone through a couple of reviews, and I always ask this question to most of the authors. How has the response to the book affirmed what you intended it to be, or surprised you in terms of not just what you intended it to be, but like, things off the wall responses where you're like, wait a minute, like, really? What are some of those that have
Mm.
stuck out for you? in terms of the response to the book and how it's been received?
Of the responses. So I haven't read a great many of them because I try to veer clear of influencing as much as I can, at least the influence that I do not use. But of what I read, I had an expectation. I had an expectation that a lot of people would be disappointed that I look the way I look and I am from where I'm from, but I don't write the sort of stories that they expect from me. And there was a bit of that, but I was actually quite surprised by how many people were able to relate. And it's just a question of what a lot of us grew up on, what we grew up reading and whatever, and now to get the same thing or something similar from somebody that looks like you, which is, I would be very excited to get that. So I get a lot of people were excited to get that as well. So that was surprising, just the number of people. It was just I realize now, a question of just how much I underestimated my audience in terms of what they expected, in terms of just how open their minds were. And yeah, that was my own foolish shortcoming. But yeah, that was surprising. But it wasn't surprising at all to find that there would be people that would be slightly disappointed to find that, I wasn't just out there entirely just championing this thing that somebody like me is supposed to, according to them, the expectation.
That's pretty cool. So another question that I thought was quite interesting for me personally, I don't know if you get asked this often, but do you have a favorite story in the collection?
Do I have a favorite story in the collection? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is going to be an annoying answer. But so Neva of Monty and Courage and the Lost Maiden are the oldest in the book. So they hold a very special place in my heart, in the same way that Ndlovu in The Walking Fish is the youngest in the book. Not the youngest in terms of age, but the earliest. And for that reason, she holds a special place in my heart. But Esfera, okay, so if I had to pick, it'd probably be Esfera of the Night. Not because it's such a great story, but because of the character, Esfera of the Night. She was initially my attempt at writing a villain. I used to read a lot of Xianxia, which is Chinese epic fantasy, and they have this idea of a villain that is entirely like an entirely bad character, despite their background. And I wanted to try and write something like that in Byron, but I fell in love with him and I gave him a redemption arc. So yeah, he holds a special place in my heart, and also because he's one of the characters that I'm writing in the novel I'm working on, and we've just spent a lot of time together. We've come a long way, so yeah, it's better off tonight.
That's how that I love that.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love that, and I love that. In the same way the stories came to you, you made friends. With with the characters that came with the story, and so now as you embark on the novel, it's almost like a reunion, in the sense.
It definitely is. Except they never leave. But yeah, so it is very much with a lot of the characters that are here, because it is the same world, and much of it is leading up to the events of the novel and what eventually happens there. Yeah, a lot of the characters very, very, very old, and Neva and I, this character I ever wrote in the story, so there's always that special place. But yeah, we've spent a lot of time.
Okay, so for those of you who now are like, I have to get a hold of this book, you can order it online. You can order it on African Books Collective. Their catalog has it, or you can just go on to africanbookscollective.com and place an order. And they have many booksellers all over the continent, and they can find a way to get a copy to you. Those of you in South Africa can also order via amazon.com or Mojaji Books on their website. You can also get a retail price for it, and a way to get the book to you. Currently, there are no EPUB versions of the book, but that will definitely be on its way in the future. So if you want a copy of the book, if you want to curl up with this might be a nice one, especially to close out winter with. We hope winter is leaving soon. And so please do go take a look on Majaji Books or African Books Collective or Amazon. So just before we start to think about wrapping up, just a couple more questions for you. I actually only have two. The first being, what was the publishing process like for you as a Zimbabwean publishing in South Africa, as a Black female author, and also at your age? And what are you working on now, and how's that going?
Right. So the publishing process, basically, when I did finally decide that this was something that I would like to get out there, I went online and I had some experience with submitting stories just in terms of the format, because there is an acceptable format in it. So yeah, a lot of research on that. And when I initially started submitting stories, but it helped that I had that experience. So it was just getting it in the correct format and finding the stories that worked well together, and finding the people that were looking for that kind of story. Initially, I didn't think I could get it published in South Africa, even in Africa in general, because it was epic fantasy and not exactly African epic fantasy. But Majaji Books is amazing in that regard, in the sense that they are always looking for something that is new and weird. So yeah, I submitted there, and Colleen got back to me, and they accepted it. And then that's when I had already written The Walking Face, so I asked if we could add that on there, and we did. And it was just a process of editing now, which was harder than writing the novel. I will say that with no shame until I'm dead. It was the hardest thing I ever did. But Noreen, the lady that helped me with the editing, was amazing in it. Literally held my hand throughout every page. But I did feel like I learned more from that entire process of just editing the novel with Noreen than I ever did just like writing, which was just amazing. And yeah, so we eventually got that out. And the other question was, what am I working on? I am working, like I said, the Pride of Noonlay, this baby, is a window, basically. So I am working on The Door, which is a novel. And it's going quite well. I'm getting a lot of help from my agents there by African Literary Agency. And so that is helping me just in terms of consistency, because a lot of the time it's just a question of, are you writing or are you just laying? So just keeping me nice and honest, and yeah, we're making great progress.
Well, awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. And we are waiting for the novel to come out. And maybe what we will do is do a book review of both the collection, which is The Window, and then The Door, as you call it, to the world, which will be the novel that you are working on. Very different take on African fantasy, unique take on African fantasy, definitely disruptive and expanding that category in a good way. And just diversifying the stories for us all out there. And I think it gives more writers permission to do the same. And very Toni Morrison, like if there's a book you want to read and it isn't out there, write it. And I feel like that's what you've done, definitely, in creating this world. So we've had a wonderful time with you tonight. And as is our custom, as we close out every book club, we always ask for a reading from the author. So Shanice, what have you chosen to read for us today? And please indulge us.
Yeah, so the book is The Pride of Noonlay. The story is The Storm Thrower, and this is the end. There was not a lot left in her, she realized as she lay there, her very skin aching. She had not eaten in days and was slipping in and out of worlds. One moment she would be chasing little rain down the beach, her sister's tiny feet sending spurs of sand into the air and floating above them like high waves. She had always been a beautiful child, and so she had always thrown beautiful stones, making the sand sing fantasies against the wind. The next morning she was gathering summer fruits from her mistress in the garden below, stealing glances at Towen who stared at her through the trees. Then she would remember that Towen had watched her crawl, that he had laughed as the others laughed in the looming candlelight of her prison, her tomb. Everything had changed again when she realized the truth. Nothing was like the certainty of death, the peace of it. All that had happened from then on seemed to be happening to someone else. She was just a girl standing on the side, waiting to die. They dragged her body to a room once, where she was certain she saw death himself, as black as ash, and she did not blink. You will rid the filth of life and throw it at the black gate. Skyra must see it, the master said through the fog of her mind, back in her tomb. Amid the fog also sat her mother, with her usual scolding of, "You are not trying. You do not throw stones like I throw stones, Fayunini," her mother said. It is not easy it is not easy for you like it is for rain. But she is a builder like me. You are not. What am I then? Faye screamed out loud, her voice heard for the first time in a long while, her eyes open. That day when the shaman came, her mother said, I did not speak because he was not wrong. He did not know it, but it was you he had come for. Faye shook, and in her daze, she felt the floor move as if swept by a ripple. You are a stone thrower, child, like all your blood, said the mother. But you throw the dark stones of Naifi. You are a destroyer. The girl from the seasons felt somewhere inside she had always known. Faye pulled her chains and dragged herself to the wall. She placed her palms against the stone and spoke the words of her kin. She spoke them and spoke them backwards. The master's men laughed at the broken child, mumbling madness, but the master did not laugh. He recognized evil when it stood before him. Glass shattered as the marble floor gave way above them, and the castle shook like a desert shanty. The laughter turned to shrieks as it hit the air. They all turned to each other, trembling and uncertain, all save the master. He flinched but once when her eyes turned to his, yet in the end he too screamed. By the time they knew to run, it was too late. Stone crushed all their bodies to pulp, and only their screams carried the dust to the ears of those who would hear of the stone thrower who had made the sky fall. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Shanice. And thank you for sharing your lovely voice and your stories that came to you over the years. We look forward to your next offering. And to those of you who are watching tonight, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time again, with yet another fabulous African female author. Until then, stay warm, stay safe, and good night. Good night.
Thank you for having me, Selena.